This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 1, Claiming Value in Negotiation. In Chapter 1, you will learn how to make sure you walk away from any negotiation with the best deal possible for you, without being unfair or difficult. The authors explain that great negotiators don't win by shouting or tricking people. They win by being prepared, calm, and clear about their goals. The first and most important idea here is BATNA, which stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. Simply put, it's your plan B. If the negotiation fails, what will you do next? For example, imagine you're interviewing for a new job. The company offers you $60,000, but you already have another offer in hand for $65,000. That $65,000 job is your BATNA. If this new company doesn't offer more than $65,000, you walk away. When you have a good BATNA, you feel stronger and more confident. You're not desperate, you have options. Next is your reservation value, the lowest deal you're willing to accept. Going back to our job example, if you've decided that you'll only accept offers above $62,000, then $62,000 is your reservation value. Anything less, and you'll politely decline. This keeps you from saying yes to a bad deal just to end the conversation quickly. Now, what happens if the company is only willing to offer between $60,000 and $68,000, and your reservation value is $62,000? Then there's some overlap between what they're offering and what you're willing to accept. That overlap is called the ZOPA, or Zone of Possible Agreement. If there's no ZOPA, for example, if they won't go above $60,000 and you won't go below $62,000, there's no deal to be made. The authors explain that finding the ZOPA early saves you time and energy. Another big idea is anchoring, setting the tone of the negotiation with the first number. People often worry about going first, but the authors show that it's usually better to make the first offer if you're well prepared. Why? Because the first number can shape how the rest of the conversation goes. For example, if you're selling a used phone and you say, "I'm asking for $300, the buyer might respond with $250. But if you hadn't said anything first, they might have offered $150. Your number becomes the starting point, the anchor. Anchoring works best when your offer sounds reasonable and is backed by fact. If you say, "Similar models are selling for $320, your anchor sounds fair and hard to argue with. But if you anchor too high or too low without a good reason, it can backfire. Let's say you're selling that same phone, and you ask for $500 even though it's worth $300. The buyer might think you're unrealistic and walk away. So the authors teach you to anchor smart, high but justifiable. Another important tip is about concessions. These are the things you're willing to give up to keep the negotiation moving. The key lesson? Don't give things away for free. For example, if you're negotiating rent with a landlord and you say, "Can you include water and electricity?" and they agree, that's good, but you should also consider offering something in return like a longer lease or higher deposit. This makes the negotiation fair. If you make a concession, always ask for something in return. It builds balance and respect. You'll also learn the power of using objective standard. These are facts, data, or expert opinions you can use to support your offer. Instead of saying, "I just feel like I deserve more," say, "Based on what other companies pay for this role, and based on my experience, I believe this salary makes sense." This keeps things logical and less emotional. The chapter finishes with a powerful message. Negotiation isn't a battle, it's a skill you can learn. You don't need to be aggressive. You just need to understand what you want, what your limits are, and how to clearly communicate with the other side. The tools in this chapter, BATNA, reservation value, ZOPA, anchoring, concessions, and objective standards, help you walk into any negotiation feeling more confident and in control. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 2, Creating Value in Negotiation. In Chapter 2, the focus shifts from protecting your own interests to finding ways to create more value for both sides in a negotiation. The authors explain that most people make a big mistake. They treat negotiations like a tug-of-war, where every dollar one side gains is a dollar the other loses. This is called fixed pie thinking. But smart negotiators know how to grow the pie before dividing it. You'll learn how to think more broadly about what's on the table. Instead of focusing on just one issue, like price, you'll discover how to include multiple issues, such as delivery time, product features, services, payment terms, or even future collaboration. This opens the door to creative solutions that make both sides happier. Let's take a simple example. Imagine you're buying a used laptop from someone. The seller wants $600, but you were hoping to spend $500. That looks like a conflict, but what if you said, if you include the laptop bag, a charger, and deliver it to my office, I can go up to $550. Now you've expanded the negotiation beyond just money and created a package that offers value in other forms. The seller might agree because those extras don't cost them much, and they still get close to their price. This strategy is called logrolling. You trade things that are less important to you but more important to the other side. In business, this might mean offering faster payment in exchange for a discount or a longer contract for better terms. The authors encourage you to ask questions like, what matters most to you? Or why is that issue important? Or is there anything else that would help you feel good about this deal? These questions help uncover hidden interests and need. Maybe the other party has budget limits, timing pressure, or concerns you weren't aware of. Once those are revealed, you can build a deal that truly works for both sides. Another big technique in this chapter is the multi-issue proposal. Instead of discussing one thing at a time, like just price, you put together several issues into a full offer. You might say, here are two versions of the deal. Option A gives you a better price, but with a longer delivery time. Option B costs a little more, but we'll deliver faster and include support. This lets the other person choose what fits them best and gives you flexibility to adjust. Also covered is the idea of a post-settlement settlement. That means, after you've reached a deal, don't stop negotiating right away. Ask, now that we both agree, can we make this even better? Because both sides are already satisfied, they often feel more relaxed and open to improvement. For instance, in a sales deal, after agreeing on price and quantity, you might explore adding a future referral bonus or training support at little cost. The main message here is this: value creation comes from listening, understanding, and being flexible, not from being tough or aggressive. If you treat negotiation as a joint problem-solving mission instead of a battle, you unlock far more options. The authors highlight that when you create value first, claiming your share becomes easier, and you build trust too. People are more likely to work with you again if they feel you looked out for them as well. Creating value is not just good strategy, it's good business. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 3, Investigative Negotiation. In Chapter 3, the authors focus on one of the most powerful but often overlooked negotiation tools: asking the right questions. This chapter teaches you how to become an investigative negotiator, someone who digs deep to uncover hidden information that can completely change the direction of a deal. Most people enter negotiations ready to talk, argue, or defend their position. But great negotiators do something different. They listen more than they speak. They treat the negotiation like a detective case, where their goal is to understand the other side's needs, constraints, and motivations. Let's look at an example. Suppose you're negotiating with a contractor to renovate your office. They give you a quote of $15,000. Instead of just trying to lower the price, you could ask, what factors are making this job more expensive? The contractor might explain that last-minute scheduling and weekend work increase their costs. Now you might suggest, What if we wait until next month and schedule only weekdays? Suddenly, the price might drop because you've solved their problem. You used investigative thinking to create a better option. This chapter teaches you to go beyond surface-level bargaining and explore deeper issues. I ask why something is important. I ask how they came to a certain number. I ask what would make the deal more appealing to them. Another story the authors share involves a corporate client negotiating a software deal. Initially, the buyer thought the seller was firm on price. But by asking more questions, the buyer learned that the seller actually cared more about being able to showcase the client as a case study. The buyer then offered to allow a public testimonial in exchange for a better price. No one had to give up anything of real value because they found out what mattered most. The authors encourage you to stay curious and patient. Most people fear asking questions because they think it makes them look uninformed. But in reality, thoughtful questions make you look professional and strategic. They open doors the other party didn't know existed. Another key tip is to test assumptions. Often, we guess what the other side wants or needs, but those guesses are wrong. For example, you might assume a supplier wants a big order, but they actually care more about quick payment. By asking, you avoid building a deal on the wrong foundation. This chapter also highlights the value of building trust early. When people feel heard and respected, they are more likely to open up. That's when real insights come out. The more you know, the better you can shape a deal that works for everyone. In short, Chapter 3 shows that negotiation isn't just about price or power. It's about information. The more you understand the full picture, the better your chances of creating and claiming value. Investigative negotiation makes you smarter, more flexible, and much more effective. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 4, When Rationality Fails, Biases of the Mind. In Chapter 4, the authors explain how our brains often trick us during negotiations. Even when we think we're being logical, hidden mental shortcuts, called cognitive biases, can lead us to make poor decisions. This chapter teaches you how to spot and avoid these thinking traps so you can negotiate more wisely. One common trap is the fixed pie bias. This is the mistaken belief that there's only so much to go around, and that any gain for the other side means a loss for you. But as you learned in earlier chapters, great negotiators know how to create value before dividing it. Let's say you're negotiating job terms. If you only focus on salary, you might miss out on other benefits like flexible hours, training, or bonuses. If you assume the deal is win-lose, you may reject offers that could have been reshaped to work for both sides. Another bias is the vividness bias. This happens when dramatic or emotional examples influence your decisions more than logic or data. For instance, if you once got cheated in a deal, you might now assume every new deal has hidden traps, even when there's no sign of that. The authors say we must learn to focus on facts, not fears. The overconfidence effect is also dangerous. This is when you believe your position is stronger than it actually is. For example, if you assume the other side has no other options, you might push too hard and lose the deal. Or, if you're sure your offer is the best, you might ignore signals that it's not working. The authors encourage you to stay realistic and always check your assumptions. Then there's the framing effect. This means the way choices are presented changes how we view them, even if the facts are the same. For instance, a doctor telling you that a treatment has a 90% success rate sounds better than saying it has a 10% failure rate. Same numbers, different feelings. In negotiation, how you frame your offers can make a big difference. Saying you'll save $200 is more powerful than this costs $800, even though both statements describe the same offer. The authors explain that to avoid these mental traps, you should slow down your thinking, take time to review your position calmly, get outside feedback from someone not involved emotionally, write down your options and review them as if advising someone else. Prepare thoroughly so your decisions are based on real numbers and logic, not emotion or assumptions. They also introduce the idea of a decision audit, a simple checklist you use after a negotiation to reflect on what biases might have influenced you. This reflection builds skill over time and helps you become more objective. In the end, the key takeaway is this: even smart people can make irrational decisions when under pressure. But if you understand how your mind works and where it can go wrong, you'll be much more in control. Recognizing these biases allows you to stay grounded, flexible, and fair, which is what separates average negotiators from negotiation geniuses. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 5, When Rationality Fails, Biases of the Heart. In Chapter 5, the authors shift from mental errors to emotional trap. They explain that even if you think logically, your heart, your emotions, ego, and pride can still lead you into bad decisions. This chapter helps you understand how emotions shape negotiations and how to manage them effectively. One of the first emotional traps discussed is egocentrism, the natural tendency to see yourself as more fair or deserving than you actually are. For example, if you believe you did most of the work on a team project, you might demand more credit or reward. But the other team members may feel the same about themselves. In negotiation, this kind of bias leads to conflict because everyone feels they're being reasonable, even when they're not. The solution is to step outside your own view and ask, how would a neutral third party see this situation? Next is loss aversion, a powerful emotional force where people feel the pain of losing more deeply than the pleasure of gaining. Suppose someone offers you a deal where you could either win $100 or lose $100 depending on a coin toss. Even though it's a fair 50-50 gamble, most people won't take it because the fear of loss outweighs the chance of gain. In negotiation, this can make people hold on to bad positions or reject good deals because they're too focused on what they might lose. The authors suggest reframing decisions. Instead of asking, "What could I lose?" ask, "What could I gain, and how can I protect myself from risk?" Another strong emotion in negotiation is regret aversion. People avoid making decisions that could lead to regret, even if the choice is smart. For example, someone might turn down a promising deal simply because they're afraid they'll regret it later if something better comes along. But waiting too long or being too cautious can lead to missed opportunities. To fight this bias, the authors recommend focusing on long-term value, not just short-term feelings. Anger is also a common emotion that clouds judgment. If someone insults your offer or acts unfairly, you might feel like punishing them by walking away. But that usually hurts you more than them. For instance, if a supplier tries to change terms last minute, your instinct might be to cancel the contract out of frustration. But staying calm and asking, "What's causing this?" might reveal a solvable issue, like a delay from their own vendor. The book teaches you to control the emotional response and refocus on outcomes. The chapter also explains trust issues, especially in negotiations between strangers or competitors. When trust is low, people often avoid sharing helpful information. But too much suspicion can block progress. For example, if a buyer assumes the seller is lying about costs, they might push so hard that the deal falls apart. The authors advise you to build small steps of trust, such as starting with low-risk agreements and keeping promises, so trust grows naturally. To manage all these emotional traps, the authors recommend a taking breaks during tense talk, a bringing in a calm third party if emotions escalate, a practicing empathy by asking, "What's driving their behavior?" a rehearsing conversations ahead of time to prepare emotionally. Overall, this chapter reminds us that negotiation is not just about logic, it's deeply human. Emotions are always present, but the more aware you are of their influence, the better you can guide them, instead of letting them guide you. A negotiation genius knows how to stay balanced emotionally, respond with purpose, and never let pride or fear ruin a good deal. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 6. Negotiating Rationally in an Irrational World. In Chapter 6, the authors combine the ideas from the previous two chapters, biases of the mind and the heart, and teach you how to stay rational even when others don't. The truth is, you can be calm, prepared, and thoughtful, but if the person across the table is emotional, biased, or stubborn, the negotiation can still go off track. This chapter gives you tools to guide negotiations back to logic and fairness. Let's start with a common real-life example. Suppose you're selling your used car, and you know its fair market value is $5,000. You show the buyer the Kelley Blue Book value and service history. But the buyer still insists it's only worth $3,000, claiming they just feel like that's right. That's not logic. It's emotional anchoring, wishful thinking, or a personal bias. This chapter teaches you how to bring conversations like this back to rational ground. One key strategy is to rely on objective standards, market data, expert opinions, or third-party facts. You can say, "I understand how you feel, but based on professional pricing tools, similar cars are listed at $5,000. I'm happy to walk through the details if you'd like." When you introduce fairness and outside benchmarks, it becomes harder for the other side to argue emotionally. Another tip is to separate the person from the problem. If someone becomes hostile, don't treat them as your opponent. Treat the issue as the shared challenge. For example, if your boss is angry about missed deadlines and you're trying to renegotiate your project timeline, don't argue back emotionally. Instead say, "I can tell this delay has been frustrating. Let's figure out how we can solve it together." This shows you're focused on fixing the issue, not fighting the person. The authors also recommend using framing technique. This means presenting your ideas in ways that speak to the other person's values and reduce resistance. For instance, if someone is afraid of loss, say, "This agreement will help you avoid future risks," instead of just, "You'll earn more." It speaks directly to their concern. Or, if they want control, say, "This option gives you full flexibility, even if the offer stays the same." One powerful approach from this chapter is the cooling off period. When emotions run high or when the other side is being completely irrational, don't push harder. Instead, suggest a pause. Say, "Why don't we take 24 hours to think this through?" People often return to the table with a clearer head and a more reasonable tone. Another real-world example comes from a business owner negotiating with a client who was demanding massive last-minute discount. Instead of arguing, the owner said, "If we cut prices that much, we can't maintain our quality, and your results may suffer. Would you prefer we adjust the scope instead?" The client realized they were being unrealistic and agreed to a more balanced deal. This is a great example of redirecting the conversation back to shared interests and long-term value. The authors also warn you to avoid reacting emotionally to irrational behavior. If someone insults your proposal, don't take it personally. Respond with curiosity. "Can you help me understand what part doesn't work for you?" This keeps the conversation productive, not defensive. In summary, Chapter 6 prepares you to handle negotiations where emotions and bias cloud judgment, whether it's from you or the other party. You learn how to stay calm, use facts, listen carefully, and guide irrational behavior back to smart, respectful decision-making. This ability to stay rational when others can't is a key trait of a true negotiation genius. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 7, Strategies of Influence. In Chapter 7, the authors focus on how to ethically influence others during a negotiation. This doesn't mean manipulation or trickery. It means presenting your case in a way that helps the other person see the value in what you're offering. This chapter introduces proven tools from psychology that help you guide decisions and create agreement more smoothly. One of the most effective tools is the principle of reciprocity. People naturally feel the urge to return favors. For example, if you offer a small concession, like agreeing to a shorter payment term, the other side may feel compelled to give something back, like faster delivery. You're not forcing them. You're creating a sense of fairness. The key is to make strategic, visible concessions that encourage cooperation. Another major influence tool is framing. This means how you present your message can change how people feel about it, even if the facts are the same. If you're selling a product, saying "save $50 today" sounds more appealing than "it costs $200," even if the net price is identical. People are more motivated to avoid a loss than to achieve a gain. So, you might frame your offer as, "If you delay, you could lose this bonus," instead of just, "You'll earn more if you act now." The authors also discuss anchoring, which you learned earlier but is revisited here as a form of influence. The first number mentioned in a negotiation tends to shape expectations. If you're negotiating a contract and you start by saying, "Our typical clients spend between $50,000 and $70,000, even if your bottom line is $40,000, you've now anchored the conversation in a higher range. Another powerful tool is social proof. The idea that people are influenced by what others are doing. If you're in sales and say, 5 other companies in your industry recently chose this same solution, that builds trust and lowers hesitation. In job interviews, you might mention that your former managers repeatedly promoted you. That signals competence without bragging. Then there's the use of authority. People tend to listen more when the information comes from a trusted expert or source. For example, if you say, "This price is in line with industry research from Gartner," or "Our offer meets government safety standards," you're showing that your position is backed by knowledge and not just opinion. The authors emphasize the importance of likability and rapport. We're more likely to say yes to people we like. Being friendly, showing empathy, and finding common ground goes a long way. For instance, if you find out you and the other person both grew up in the same city, mention it. That small connection builds comfort and trust. It's not fake, it's simply being human. Importantly, the book advises using these influence tools ethically and responsibly. Manipulation may bring short-term success, but it damages long-term trust and reputation. The goal isn't to trick someone into saying yes. It's to help them feel comfortable and confident saying yes to a fair, valuable offer. In short, Chapter 7 gives you a set of powerful tools to guide decisions and strengthen your position without resorting to pressure or deceit. You learn how to shape the way your offer is received, increase trust, and create a more persuasive and successful negotiation experience. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 8. Blind Spots in Negotiation. Chapter 8 explores a subtle but critical challenge in negotiation: blind spots, the hidden areas where you're unaware of what you don't know. These blind spots can cause even experienced negotiators to make costly errors. This chapter helps you recognize and address these gaps before they turn into missed opportunities or failed deals. A common blind spot is assuming that you understand the other side's priorities perfectly. Let's say you're negotiating a business partnership and believe the other side only cares about price. You push hard for discounts. Later, you find out they cared more about delivery speed and customer service. If you had asked more questions early on, you could have created a win-win deal. The lesson: never assume, always confirm. Another example of a blind spot is hidden stakeholders. Sometimes, the person you're negotiating with isn't the only decision maker. For instance, you may be negotiating with a manager, but they need approval from legal or finance. If you don't ask early on, you may reach what you think is a final deal only to hear, "I have to check with my team." The authors suggest asking, "Is there anyone else who needs to approve this agreement?" This helps avoid surprises later. There's also the danger of focusing too narrowly on one issue, usually price. This is another blind spot. You may ignore other issues that matter more to the other side or even to you. For example, in a job offer, maybe the salary is lower than expected, but the role offers work-from-home benefits, stock options, and a strong promotion path. If you only focus on the base pay, you might reject a great opportunity. The authors encourage you to map out all issues before beginning a negotiation. Make a checklist. What matters to me? What might matter to them? Are there any issues I haven't thought about? This wide-angle view keeps you from falling into tunnel vision. Another serious blind spot is cultural or organizational norms. If you're negotiating with someone from a different country, company, or background, they may have different expectations about timing, politeness, or how decisions are made. For instance, in some cultures, silence during negotiation is a sign of respect, not disagreement. If you misinterpret that silence, you might speak too soon or rush the process. So, the authors advise doing cultural homework when working in unfamiliar environments. One more hidden risk is confirmation bias, seeing only what you expect to see. If you believe someone is dishonest, you might interpret every delay or change as a trick. This mindset can damage trust. To counter this, try asking neutral, open-ended questions like, "Can you walk me through the change in terms?" rather than jumping to conclusions. To manage blind spots, the authors offer these practical tips. Use a checklist before and after each negotiation. A debrief with a colleague. They might see something you missed. Or ask clarifying questions early and often. Or stay flexible. New information should change your approach. The main message here is that blind spots aren't about being careless. They're about being human. Even smart people overlook things. But the more aware you are of what you might not know, the better decisions you'll make. A negotiation genius always questions assumptions, stays curious, and looks at the full picture. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 9, Confronting Lies and Deception. Chapter 9 dives into a tough but important topic, dealing with dishonesty in negotiations. While most people are honest, sometimes the other party may stretch the truth, hide facts, or mislead you. This chapter teaches you how to detect, respond to, and prevent deception without damaging the relationship or making things worse. First, the authors explain that deception comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a direct lie, like claiming a product is new when it's refurbished. Other times, it's about withholding important information, such as not mentioning hidden fees in a contract. The trick is learning how to spot these warning signs early. A key tactic for uncovering dishonesty is to ask specific, direct questions. For example, if you're buying a car and you ask, "Has this car ever been in an accident?" The seller might hesitate or give a vague answer like, "Not that I know of." That's a red flag. A more honest seller would respond clearly and confidently with evidence, like, "No, and I can show you the vehicle history report." Another strategy is to watch for behavior changes. If someone suddenly gets defensive, avoids eye contact, or becomes overly detailed in one area while skipping another, they might be hiding something. It's not a guarantee, but it's a signal to dig deeper. The authors stress that you should always verify key claims, especially in high-stakes negotiations. Don't rely solely on verbal promises. Ask for proof. If a supplier says they can meet a delivery deadline, ask for timelines from past clients. If a job offer promises bonuses, ask to see the bonus structure in writing. One smart technique shared is the devil's advocate question. This means pretending to be unsure to see how the other party reacts. For instance, you might say, "I've heard some sellers in this market don't include licensing costs in the initial quote. How do you handle that?" If the person reacts honestly, great. If they dodge or seem uneasy, you may have discovered a potential issue. If you catch someone being dishonest, the authors advise responding with calm curiosity, not anger. Say, "I noticed something doesn't quite match up. Can you help me understand this?" This gives the person a chance to correct themselves without feeling attacked. It keeps the tone professional and increases the chances of fixing the issue peacefully. The chapter also explores how to create an environment where deception is less likely. One way is to build mutual transparency. Share some of your own interests and limits to signal fairness, and invite them to do the same. Another way is to write clear contracts and confirm agreements in writing so nothing gets lost or twisted later. Lastly, the authors remind you to protect your own reputation. Never lie, exaggerate, or mislead, even if others do. Why? Because people talk. One dishonest move can ruin your credibility for years. Being known as trustworthy is one of the most powerful assets in business and life. In short, Chapter 9 equips you with tools to handle dishonesty wisely. You learn how to ask better questions, read between the lines, verify facts, and address issues with confidence and integrity. A negotiation genius doesn't just protect value, they protect truth. In Chapter 10, the authors dive into the topic of ethics in negotiation, how to handle situations where the right course of action isn't always obvious. They explain that negotiations often involve more than just numbers and terms. They involve values, honesty, and integrity. The goal here is to help you make smart decisions without sacrificing your moral compass. Ethical dilemmas usually show up when you face pressure to do something that feels wrong just to gain an advantage. For instance, imagine a hiring manager who's told to mislead a candidate about future promotion opportunities to get them to accept a lower salary. That's ethically wrong, even if it's not illegal. One of the biggest challenges is that ethical lines aren't always clear. Sometimes the law allows something, but your gut says it's not fair. For example, it may be legal to sell a product knowing it's about to be replaced by a better version, but is it ethical not to inform the buyer? This chapter encourages you to ask bigger questions like, would I be comfortable if this were made public? Or would I want to be treated this way? Or does this decision reflect who I want to be? The authors discuss how ego, competition, and pressure can pull people into questionable behavior. A salesperson might lie to beat a quota. A job seeker might exaggerate credentials to compete. But once ethical shortcuts begin, it's easy to slide deeper. That's why this chapter teaches you to build strong ethical habits early. They suggest creating a personal code of conduct, your own rulebook for how you'll act, even when it's hard. For example, I won't lie about what other companies are offering me. I'll be clear about deal terms before someone signs. Or I'll respect private or sensitive information shared with me. One practical example the book shares involves a company negotiating a supplier contract. The supplier made an honest mistake and underbid a key service. The buyer could have taken advantage of the error, but instead they pointed it out and invited a fair revision. That built long-term trust and a stronger partnership. The ethical choice paid off in loyalty. Another tool for staying ethical is the front page test. Ask yourself, how would I feel if my actions were on the front page of a newspaper? If the idea makes you uncomfortable, it's a sign to rethink your decision. The authors also explore gray areas like bluffing. Is it ever okay to bluff? Maybe, but only when it's clear both parties understand that bluffing is part of the game. In poker, bluffing is expected. In real estate, some puffery might be tolerated. But in job offers or legal agreements, the consequences of misleading behavior are much higher. Importantly, this chapter reinforces that ethical behavior builds power, not weakness. People trust you more. They're more willing to work with you again. Your reputation becomes a hidden form of influence. People know they can rely on you. In summary, Chapter 10 gives you the tools to handle moral gray zones with confidence. You learn how to ask the right questions, hold your ground with grace, and make choices you'll be proud of, both in the deal and afterward. That's the mindset of a real negotiation genius. Successful, respected, and true to their values. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 11. Negotiating from a Position of Weakness. In Chapter 11, the authors tackle one of the toughest situations a negotiator can face: when you have little or no power. Maybe you don't have alternatives, or the other side is much bigger, richer, or more experienced. This chapter shows you how to negotiate smart even when your leverage is limited, and how to shift the dynamics in your favor. First, the authors stress that having less power doesn't mean you're helpless. You may not have a strong BATNA best alternative to a negotiated agreement, but you can still gain strength by changing the frame of the negotiation. One key move is to focus on fairness and objective criteria. For example, if you're a small supplier negotiating with a major retailer, you might say, "Let's base pricing on standard industry rates for companies of my size and service level." This changes the conversation from one of power to one of principles. It's no longer about who's bigger, it's about what's fair. Another strategy is to highlight your unique value. If you can offer something the other party can't easily get elsewhere, your perceived weakness turns into a strength. Let's say you're a freelancer negotiating with a large company. Even though they have hundreds of options, you might be the only one with specific expertise in their niche. If you make that value clear, they'll see you as a rare asset, not just one of many. You can also use time and information to your advantage. Sometimes, big organizations move slowly or don't fully understand their own priorities. If you're smaller and faster, offer quicker service or flexible terms they can't get from larger competitors. For example, say, "I can deliver this project in 3 days, while your standard vendor takes 2 weeks." Speed becomes your power. The authors also talk about the power of relationships and reputation. Even if you don't have power today, if you act professionally, communicate clearly, and deliver quality work, people will remember you. You'll build trust, and that becomes leverage in future deals. Another useful technique is to create options within the negotiation. If the other party controls the main terms, you can still suggest choices. For instance, would you prefer faster delivery with a smaller quantity, or a full shipment next month? Giving options shows flexibility and keeps you in the driver's seat. One real-life story in the book features a startup negotiating with a major investor. The investor offered tough terms. Instead of walking away, the founders invited 2 other potential investors to look at the deal. Just by showing interest from others, they gained power, without even having a solid second offer. The lesson? Sometimes, the appearance of power is enough to shift the balance. The authors also warn against acting desperate. If you seem too eager, others may take advantage. Instead, remain calm and ask smart questions. Focus on the long term, not just short-term wins. In short, Chapter 11 proves that even when you're in a weak position, you're not stuck. By being creative, using fairness, showcasing your strengths, and staying composed, you can still negotiate outcomes you're proud of. A true negotiation genius knows how to stay strong, especially when the odds seem stacked against them. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 12, When Negotiations Get Ugly. Chapter 12 is about the moments when negotiations turn tense, emotional, or aggressive, what the authors call ugly negotiations. These are the situations where people raise their voices, throw out ultimatums, or even try to manipulate. This chapter gives you the tools to stay calm, defuse tension, and bring the conversation back on track. The authors begin with a truth. Ugly negotiations usually happen when emotions override logic. This might happen because the stakes are high, one side feels disrespected, or someone believes they're being taken advantage of. You can't always prevent this, but you can prepare for it. One of the first things they recommend is to separate the emotion from the issue. If someone says, "This is the worst offer I've ever seen," don't respond emotionally. Instead, calmly ask, "Can you help me understand what parts are most concerning to you?" This redirects the energy toward problem solving rather than personal attack. Another helpful tactic is using process moves. These are changes to how the negotiation is happening, not the content but the structure. For example, or if the conversation is too heated, take a break. Or if it feels like a deadlock, suggest bringing in a mediator. Or if things are going in circles, try switching topics or reframing the discussion. One example the authors share involves a union and management team stuck in a bitter salary dispute. Both sides were frustrated and accused each other of bad faith. Instead of pushing harder, a neutral third party suggested each side submit their demands privately and then meet to compare. This change in process cooled the emotions and allowed them to focus on fact. The book also explores how to respond to ultimatums and threat. If someone says, "Take this deal or we walk," your instinct may be to fight back, but that usually makes things worse. Instead, use calm language to open the door for flexibility. For instance, let's not lock ourselves into corners. What would it take to keep the conversation going? This keeps the negotiation alive and lowers the tension. Another powerful move is to acknowledge emotions without agreeing to unfair demand. If someone is clearly upset, you might say, "I can see this issue matters a lot to you, and I want to understand why." That statement doesn't give in, but it shows empathy, which can help the other person feel heard and start calming down. The authors also advise preparing for ugly negotiations in advance. If you know a conversation might turn confrontational, like a firing, a contract cancellation, or a legal dispute, plan your words carefully. Practice with a colleague. Choose a neutral setting. Prepare notes that help you stay focused under pressure. And finally, if a negotiation becomes toxic or abusive, don't be afraid to walk away. You can say something like, "I think we may need to pause and revisit this later when we're both in a better space to work productively." Knowing when to step back is part of being strong, not weak. In summary, Chapter 12 teaches you how to keep your cool when negotiations get intense. By staying calm, changing the process, and using empathy and strategy, you can steer the discussion back toward result. Even in the ugliest moments, a negotiation genius finds a way to lead with clarity and respect. This is the summary of the book, Negotiation Genius, by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman. Chapter 13, When Not to Negotiate. In Chapter 13, the authors introduce a powerful and often overlooked idea. Sometimes the smartest move is not to negotiate at all. While most of the book focuses on strategies for success, this chapter reminds us that walking away, or choosing not to engage, is sometimes the best strategy of all. There are clear warning signs that a negotiation should be avoided. 1. No zone of possible agreement. ZOPA. If your minimum requirements and the other party's maximum offer don't overlap, then no deal is possible. For example, if you're selling a car for at least $7,000 and the buyer won't go above $6,000, then no amount of talking will create a deal. 2. The other party is acting in bad faith. This includes when they consistently lie, change terms at the last minute, or threaten you unfairly. Suppose you're negotiating a partnership and every time you reach agreement, the terms shift. This signals they may not be trustworthy. Continuing could waste your time, or worse, harm your reputation. 3. You have a stronger BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. If your backup plan is clearly better than any deal the other party can offer, you shouldn't settle. For instance, if you're negotiating a salary of $70,000 and already have a confirmed job offer for $75,000 elsewhere, it makes no sense to keep negotiating unless they can exceed that. 4. The cost of negotiation is too high. This includes time, energy, and emotional strain. For example, imagine spending weeks negotiating a small client deal that pays very little. That time might be better spent securing larger clients or growing your business. The authors emphasize that choosing not to negotiate is not a failure, it's a sign of wisdom. Too often, people feel they must win every deal, even when the deal isn't worth it. This mindset wastes resources and leads to poor outcomes. One example from the book involves a company that spent months negotiating with a supplier who kept increasing costs and lowering quality guarantees. Eventually, the company decided to walk away and invest in building in-house capabilities instead. This wasn't defeat, it was a better long-term decision. Another powerful idea in this chapter is to trust your preparation. If you've done your research, defined your BATNA, and know your reservation value, you'll have a clear signal when it's time to step away. The emotional pressure to just make a deal can be strong, but it should never override your well-informed boundaries. The authors also suggest using clear, professional language to exit negotiations. You don't need to be rude or dramatic. You might say, after reviewing the numbers and options, I don't believe this deal will work for me at this time. I appreciate your effort, and I wish you the best. This preserves relationships and your reputation, leaving the door open for future opportunities. In short, Chapter 13 reminds us that not every negotiation is worth pursuing. Knowing when to say no or not now is one of the most powerful skills you can develop. A negotiation genius doesn't just know how to make great deals, they also know which deals not to make. This is the summary of the book Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman, Chapter 14, The Path to Genius. Chapter 14 serves as a wrap-up and roadmap. It's about how to turn everything you've learned so far into a lifelong habit of negotiation mastery. The authors emphasize that becoming a negotiation genius isn't about memorizing tricks, it's about developing the right mindset, practicing consistently, and learning from every experience. The chapter starts by reminding you that great negotiators aren't born, they're built. Even people who think they're bad at negotiating can become excellent through preparation, reflection, and intentional growth. The real genius lies not in getting every deal perfect, but in constantly learning and improving. One of the most important tools shared here is the negotiation debrief. After every negotiation, win or lose, you ask yourself, what worked? What didn't? What did I learn about myself and the other party? What could I do differently next time? For example, after a salary discussion, you might realize you spoke too quickly or didn't ask enough questions. By writing that down, you sharpen your skills for the next time. This practice turns every experience into a lesson. The authors also suggest building a negotiation journal. In it, you keep notes from each major negotiation you handle. This allows patterns to emerge, like whether you tend to accept deals too fast, get flustered under pressure, or avoid conflict. Once you see the patterns, you can start working on them. Another key point is to continue challenging yourself. Don't just negotiate when it's safe or easy. Seek out chances to test your skills. Volunteer to lead discussions at work, help friends negotiate, or role-play difficult conversations. Even small, low-risk situations, like asking for a hotel upgrade or requesting better service, can sharpen your confidence and instincts. Importantly, the chapter talks about developing ethical strength and long-term reputation. Over time, people will remember how you handled pressure, how you treated them, and whether you could be trusted. Those traits become part of your personal brand. In the long run, your reputation becomes a source of power, bringing you more opportunities with less resistance. They also introduce the idea of becoming a mentor to others. Teaching negotiation to peers, teammates, or students doesn't just help them, it helps you reinforce your own understanding. When you explain a strategy out loud, you clarify it in your own mind and see it more clearly in action. Finally, the authors leave you with this message. Negotiation genius isn't about dominating or winning in the traditional sense, it's about creating outcomes that are strong, fair, and sustainable. It's about influencing with integrity, communicating with clarity, and acting with courage when decisions are hard. In summary, Chapter 14 is your blueprint for continuous growth. You've now learned the principles, tools, and mindset of a master negotiator. The next step is practice. Over time, as you apply these lessons and build your experience, you'll find yourself solving tough problems, building better relationships, and leading with confidence. That's what it means to walk the path of a true negotiation genius.